In this gripping tale of family, suspicion, and unexpected revelations, Sarah, a devoted stepmother, finds herself caught in a web of mystery surrounding her stepchildren, Ethan and Ava. As she uncovers their secretive behavior, Sarah's concern grows, leading her on a journey that will challenge her perceptions and test the bonds of their newly formed family. What begins as a suspenseful investigation takes an unexpected turn, revealing truths that will forever change their relationships and redefine the meaning of family. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As she sat at the dinner table, her eyes darted between her stepchildren, Ethan and Ava. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, and their furtive glances didn't escape her notice. She had always prided herself on being an attentive stepmother, but lately, it felt like she was on the outside looking in. "So, how was school today?" Sarah asked, trying to inject some normalcy into the stilted atmosphere. Her question was met with non-committal shrugs and mumbled responses. Ethan barely looked up from his plate, while Ava seemed more interested in pushing her peas around than engaging in conversation. As the silence stretched on, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Were they plotting something? Had she done something to upset them? The weight of her insecurities pressed down on her, making each bite of food taste like sawdust in her mouth. Later that night, as Sarah was tidying up the kitchen, she heard hushed voices coming from upstairs. Her heart rate quickened as she strained to make out the words. The floorboards creaked softly as she made her way to the base of the stairs, careful not to make a sound. "We can't keep this up forever," Ava's voice drifted down, barely above a whisper. "Just a little longer," Ethan replied, his tone urgent. "We can't let her find out." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What were they hiding? Her mind conjured up worst-case scenarios: drugs, trouble at school, or perhaps they were planning to run away. The possibilities seemed endless and increasingly dire. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Sarah decided to confront the situation head-on. The next morning, she approached Ethan as he was grabbing his backpack for school. "Ethan, do you have a minute?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was hoping we could talk about how things have been going lately." Ethan's shoulders tensed visibly. He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've noticed that you and Ava have been distant lately. I just want to make sure everything's okay. You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" For a moment, something flashed in Ethan's eyes. Was it guilt? Fear? But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a mask of indifference. "Everything's fine," he said flatly. "I've got to go, or I'll be late for school." Before Sarah could press further, Ethan was out the door, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, more confused and worried than ever. She couldn't shake the feeling that her stepchildren were slipping away from her, and she was powerless to stop it. As she watched Ethan's retreating figure through the window, Sarah made a silent vow to herself. She would get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter what it took. Her family was at stake, and she wasn't about to let it fall apart without a fight. Little did Sarah know, her determination to uncover the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family, and ultimately lead to a revelation that would change their lives forever. Sarah's concern grew as the days passed. The hushed conversations and secretive glances between Ethan and Ava became more frequent, and she felt increasingly isolated from her stepchildren. Determined to bridge the gap, she decided to approach Ava, hoping the girl might be more open to talking. One afternoon, Sarah found Ava in her room, hunched over her desk. "Hey, sweetie," Sarah said, knocking gently on the open door. "Do you have a minute to chat?" Ava's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh, I'm kind of busy right now," she said, quickly shuffling papers on her desk. Sarah took a tentative step into the room. "I just wanted to check in with you. You and Ethan have seemed a bit distant lately. Is everything okay?" Ava's posture stiffened. "Everything's fine," she said, her tone clipped. "I just have a lot of homework." Sarah tried to keep her voice light, despite the growing knot in her stomach. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? If something's bothering you." "I said I'm fine," Ava interrupted, her voice sharp. "Can you please just leave me alone? I really need to focus on this." Taken aback by Ava's uncharacteristic outburst, Sarah retreated from the room, her worry now tinged with hurt. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was failing as a stepmother. Later that evening, while Ethan was in the shower, Sarah found herself outside his room. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Was she really considering invading his privacy? The thought made her uncomfortable, but the need to understand what was happening with her stepchildren overrode her hesitation. Taking a deep breath, she entered the room. Her eyes scanned the space, looking for anything out of place. As she approached Ethan's desk, a small piece of paper caught her attention. It was partially hidden under a textbook, but she could make out what looked like an address scrawled in hasty handwriting. Sarah's heart raced as she carefully slid the paper out. The address was unfamiliar, and beneath it was a time and date for later that week. Her mind reeled with possibilities. Was Ethan meeting someone? Was he in some kind of trouble? The sound of the shower turning off startled her. Quickly, she snapped a photo of the note with her phone and replaced it exactly as she'd found it. She slipped out of the room, her mind buzzing with questions and fears. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah turned to the internet for answers. She found herself deep in parenting forums, searching for advice on how to deal with secretive teenagers. The stories she read only fueled her anxiety. Tales of drug use, dangerous relationships, and criminal activities filled her screen. As the night wore on, Sarah's imagination ran wild. She pictured Ethan and Ava involved in increasingly dire scenarios. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through her window, she was exhausted and more worried than ever. Over breakfast, Sarah watched Ethan and Ava with new eyes. Every gesture, every whispered word between them seemed loaded with hidden meaning. She wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but fear held her back. What if pushing too hard drove them further away? As Ethan and Ava left for school, Sarah stood at the window watching them go. She felt more isolated than ever, a stranger in her own home. The weight of her worries pressed down on her, threatening to overwhelm her. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, a spark of determination flared. She couldn't stand by and watch her family crumble. Whatever was going on, she would get to the bottom of it. Sarah made a decision then and there. She would follow Ethan and Ava to the address on the note. It was time to uncover the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to face. The day of the mysterious meeting arrived, bringing with it a deluge of rain that seemed to mirror Sarah's turbulent emotions. As evening approached, she watched from the kitchen window as Ethan and Ava huddled under an umbrella, whispering to each other before disappearing into the stormy night. Sarah's heart raced as she grabbed her car keys. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, but now that it was here, doubt crept in. Was she overreacting? Invading their privacy? But the memory of their secretive behavior steeled her resolve. She had to know the truth. Sliding into her car, Sarah waited a few moments before starting the engine, giving Ethan and Ava a head start. The rain drummed against the roof as she pulled out of the driveway, her windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. She followed at a distance, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The unfamiliar streets twisted and turned, leading them into a part of town Sarah had never visited. Rows of identical houses gave way to more industrial buildings, increasing her unease. Finally, she saw Ethan and Ava turn down a side street. Sarah parked her car a block away, her pulse pounding in her ears. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she watched them approach a nondescript building with boarded-up windows. Swallowing hard, Sarah stepped out into the rain. She darted from shadow to shadow, the chill seeping through her clothes as she sought cover behind a parked van. From her vantage point, she could see Ethan and Ava conferring briefly before knocking on the building's heavy metal door. The door creaked open, spilling yellow light onto the wet pavement. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw a group of teenagers inside. Some faces she recognized from Ethan and Ava's school, others were strangers. The knot in her stomach tightened. What kind of trouble had her stepchildren gotten themselves into? As Ethan and Ava disappeared inside, Sarah crept closer, her shoes squelching in puddles. She pressed herself against the cold brick wall, straining to hear over the patter of rain. Muffled voices and laughter drifted out, punctuated by the occasional thump of bass. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Were they involved in some kind of underground party scene? Or something worse? Drugs? A gang? The weight of her fears threatened to crush her. She debated calling the police, her hand hovering over her phone. But what if she was wrong? What if this ruined any chance of trust between her and her stepchildren? Indecision paralyzed her as she stood there, rain soaking through her jacket. Suddenly, the door swung open again. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart hammering. A group of teenagers spilled out, laughing and chattering excitedly. They seemed normal. No signs of intoxication or illicit behavior, just kids being kids. Confusion replaced fear as Sarah watched them disperse into the night. What was going on here? This didn't fit any of the scenarios she had imagined. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed Ethan and Ava emerging from the building, arms laden with what looked like art supplies and decorations. Sarah ducked behind a dumpster, her mind whirling. As she watched Ethan and Ava walk away, their heads bent close in animated discussion, she realized she was no closer to understanding the truth. In fact, she felt more lost than ever. The rain began to ease as Sarah made her way back to her car, her clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. She sat behind the wheel, staring blankly at the steering wheel. The evening had raised more questions than it answered, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. As she started the engine, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go on like this. The secrets, the suspicion, the fear, it was tearing her apart. She needed answers, and she needed them soon. Tomorrow, she decided, she would confront Ethan and Ava directly. Whatever the truth was, it couldn't be worse than this agonizing uncertainty. With a heavy sigh, Sarah pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the mysterious building and her shattered expectations. Little did she know, the truth would be more surprising and more heartwarming than anything she could have imagined. As Sarah drove home, her mind churning with questions, she couldn't shake the image of Ethan and Ava leaving the building with art supplies. It didn't fit with any of the dire scenarios she had imagined. Curiosity began to replace her fear, and she found herself circling back to the mysterious location. Parking her car a safe distance away, Sarah approached the building on foot. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, and the sound of laughter drifted through the night air. She crept closer, her heart pounding, until she was near enough to peer through a gap in the boarded-up windows. What she saw inside made her gasp softly. The interior of the building was a hive of activity. Teenagers, including Ethan and Ava, were bustling about, hanging decorations, arranging furniture, and setting up what looked like a small stage. The atmosphere was far from sinister. It was festive and excited. Sarah watched, transfixed, as Ethan helped string up fairy lights, while Ava directed a group painting a large banner. The words on the banner were obscured from her angle, but the care and enthusiasm they put into their work was evident. As she observed the scene, Sarah's emotions shifted dramatically. The tension that had been building for weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity and, surprisingly, joy. Whatever this was, it clearly wasn't the dangerous situation she had feared. She found herself smiling involuntarily as she watched Ethan joke with his friends. His face lit up in a way she hadn't seen in weeks. Ava seemed to be in her element, confidently coordinating the decorating efforts. It was a side of her stepchildren she rarely got to see, and it warmed her heart. For a moment, Sarah considered walking in and revealing herself. The urge to be part of this secret world, to share in whatever they were planning, was strong. But something held her back. This was clearly important to Ethan and Ava, and she didn't want to intrude on their moment. As she continued to watch, Sarah began to piece together clues from the past few weeks, the whispered conversations, the hidden notes, the secretive behavior. It all started to make sense in a new light. They weren't hiding something terrible. They were planning something special. A wave of guilt washed over her as she realized how quickly she had jumped to the worst conclusions. She had let her insecurities as a stepmother cloud her judgment, assuming the worst of the children she loved. Lost in thought, Sarah almost missed the moment when Ethan pulled out a familiar-looking notebook, the same one she had seen him hastily hide away numerous times. From her vantage point, she could just make out what looked like a list of names and tasks. It wasn't a sign of trouble. It was a planning document. As the night wore on, the excitement in the room seemed to grow. Sarah found herself caught up in the energy, even from her hidden spot outside. She watched as Ethan and Ava high-fived each other after successfully hanging a particularly tricky decoration, and her heart swelled with pride. Eventually, the teens began to pack up for the night, their voices filled with anticipation for whatever event they were preparing. Sarah knew it was time for her to leave as well. She had seen enough to ease her fears, but the mystery of what exactly they were planning remained. As she made her way back to her car, Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. The fear and suspicion that had been weighing her down were replaced by curiosity and a touch of excitement. Whatever Ethan and Ava were up to, it was clearly something positive, something that brought them joy. Driving home, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't confront them about what she had seen. Instead, she would trust them, give them the space to carry out their plans, and when the time came, she would be ready to celebrate whatever it was they were working so hard to create. With a small smile on her face, Sarah realized that sometimes the best parenting decision was to step back and let your children surprise you. As she pulled into her driveway, she felt a renewed sense of hope for her relationship with Ethan and Ava, an excitement for what the future might hold. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation for Sarah. She found herself watching Ethan and Ava with new eyes, noticing the excited glances they shared and the hastily ended phone conversations when she entered the room. But instead of the anxiety these actions had previously caused, Sarah now felt a warm curiosity. On what seemed to be a pivotal evening, Sarah pretended to be engrossed in a book as Ethan and Ava hurriedly left the house. "We're going to study at a friend's," Ava called out, barely making eye contact. Sarah simply nodded, hiding a knowing smile behind her book. Once they had gone, Sarah's resolve wavered. Should she follow them again? The temptation was strong, but she resisted. She had made a promise to herself to trust them, and she intended to keep it. Hours passed, and Sarah found herself unable to focus on anything. Her mind kept drifting to what Ethan and Ava might be doing. Finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, she decided to take a short drive to clear her head. As if on autopilot, she found herself near the building from the other night. Sarah parked across the street, telling herself she would just take a quick look and then leave. But as she approached, the scene that greeted her made her stop in her tracks. The previously nondescript building was transformed. Soft, twinkling lights adorned the entrance, and colorful streamers fluttered in the evening breeze. The boarded-up windows had been cleverly disguised with vibrant murals, turning the once dreary facade into a work of art. Sarah's heart swelled as she recognized Ava's artistic style in one of the murals, a beautiful landscape that seemed to bring life to the urban setting. She could almost picture Ava painstakingly working on it, pouring her heart into every brushstroke. As she watched, a steady stream of people began to arrive. Teenagers, adults, even a few elderly individuals made their way into the building. Each person carried something: a dish of food, a musical instrument, or a small gift. The atmosphere was one of joyful anticipation. Sarah's curiosity got the better of her, and she edged closer, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. Through an open door, she could see a space transformed into a warm, welcoming gathering place. Tables were laden with food, and in one corner, a small stage was set up with microphones and instruments. Suddenly, Sarah heard a familiar laugh. She peered around the doorframe and saw Ethan, dressed more formally than usual, greeting guests with a wide smile. He seemed so grown up, so confident in this role. Next to him, Ava was arranging name tags, her face glowing with excitement. As Sarah watched, she realized this wasn't just a party. It was a community event, bringing together people of all ages. She overheard snippets of conversation about fundraising and local charities, and her heart swelled with pride. Her stepchildren weren't just having fun, they were making a difference. A lump formed in Sarah's throat as she thought about how quick she had been to assume the worst. Here were Ethan and Ava, not only staying out of trouble, but actively working to bring joy and support to their community. And they had done it all on their own, without seeking praise or recognition. For a moment, Sarah considered walking in, telling them how proud she was, but something held her back. This was their moment, their achievement. She didn't want to intrude or make them feel like she had been spying. As she turned to leave, a bittersweet feeling washed over her. She was immensely proud of Ethan and Ava, but also a little sad that they hadn't felt they could share this with her. She vowed to work on building a relationship where they would feel comfortable including her in such important parts of their lives. Walking back to her car, Sarah's mind was already racing with ideas. How could she show Ethan and Ava that she trusted them, that she was on their side? How could she support their evident passion for community service without taking over? As she drove home, a plan began to form in her mind. She couldn't change the past, but she could certainly shape the future. And that future, she decided, would be one where trust, open communication, and shared experiences would bring their blended family closer together. With a smile on her face and hope in her heart, Sarah looked forward to the day when Ethan and Ava would feel ready to share their secret with her. And when that day came, she would be ready to celebrate their accomplishments and support their dreams. No matter what form they took, Sarah arrived home, her mind buzzing with the revelation of Ethan and Ava's secret project. As she settled into the quiet house, the weight of her earlier suspicions pressed heavily on her conscience. She realized how close she had come to damaging the fragile trust she had built with her stepchildren. Unable to sleep, Sarah found herself in the kitchen, absently stirring a cup of tea as she replayed the events of the past few weeks in her mind. The whispered conversations, the furtive glances, the hastily hidden notes, all of it now cast in a new light. What she had interpreted as signs of trouble were actually evidence of something wonderful. As the night wore on, Sarah grappled with a mix of emotions. Pride in Ethan and Ava's initiative and compassion warred with guilt over her lack of faith in them. She wondered how she could have so quickly jumped to the worst conclusions. Was it a reflection of her own insecurities as a stepmother, or a deeper fear of failing in her new role? Sarah's thoughts drifted to her own childhood, remembering the times when her parents' lack of trust had created a rift in their relationship. She had vowed to be different, to be the kind of parent who supported and believed in her children. Yet at the first sign of secrecy, she had fallen into the same trap of suspicion and fear. As dawn broke, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future of her relationship with Ethan and Ava. She would work on building an environment of trust and open communication, one where they would feel safe sharing their dreams and projects with her. But how to begin? Sarah knew she couldn't simply confront them about what she had discovered. That would only reinforce the idea that she didn't trust them. No, she needed to take a more subtle approach, one that would encourage them to open up naturally. As she watched the sunrise, Sarah began to formulate a plan. She would start by showing more interest in their lives without prying, creating opportunities for casual conversations about their interests and aspirations. She would share more about her own experiences, both successes and failures, to show them that it was okay to be vulnerable. Most importantly, Sarah decided, she would work on her own reactions. No more jumping to conclusions or assuming the worst. She would practice patience and trust, giving Ethan and Ava the space to come to her in their own time. As the house began to stir with the sounds of Ethan and Ava getting ready for school, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, times when her old fears would resurface, but she was committed to this new path. When Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and reaching for the cereal, Sarah saw him in a new light. Gone was the suspicion that had colored her perception for weeks. Instead, she saw a young man with a secret passion for helping others, someone who was capable of organizing and leading a community event. "Morning, Ethan," she said warmly. "Sleep well?" He grunted in response, but Sarah didn't let it deter her. "I was thinking," she continued casually, "maybe we could do something together this weekend, as a family. Is there anything you'd like to do?" Ethan paused, spoon halfway to his mouth, looking at her with a mix of surprise and curiosity. I don't know," he said slowly. Maybe we could volunteer somewhere, if you're interested in that kind of thing?" Sarah's heart soared at his tentative suggestion. It was a small opening, but it was a start. "That sounds wonderful," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral despite her excitement. "Why don't you and Ava think about some options, and we can discuss it at dinner?" As Ethan nodded and returned to his cereal, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The road to rebuilding trust and open communication would be long, but she was ready for the journey. And as she watched Ethan and Ava leave for school, their heads bent close in conversation, she allowed herself to imagine a future where secrets were shared, not hidden, and where their blended family was stronger for the challenges they had overcome. With a deep breath and a determined smile, Sarah began to prepare for the day ahead, ready to face whatever it might bring with a new perspective and an open heart. As the day of the secret event approached, Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind of anticipation and nervous energy. She had successfully maintained her composure over the past few days, resisting the urge to probe or question Ethan and Ava about their activities. Instead, she had focused on creating a more open and supportive atmosphere at home, dropping subtle hints about her interest in community service and volunteering. The morning of the event arrived, and Sarah woke early, her mind racing with possibilities. She had deliberately left her schedule open, ready to be available if Ethan and Ava decided to include her in their plans. As she busied herself with household chores, she couldn't help but steal glances at her stepchildren, noting their barely contained excitement. Mid-morning, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her friend Lisa, inviting her out for a spontaneous lunch and shopping trip. For a moment, Sarah was tempted. It would be a welcome distraction from the anticipation that had been building. But something held her back. She politely declined, citing a vague family commitment. As she put her phone down, Sarah caught Ethan and Ava exchanging meaningful looks. She pretended not to notice, but her heart raced. Were they finally ready to share their secret? The hours ticked by slowly. Sarah found herself straightening the same stack of magazines multiple times, unable to focus on any task for long. She was hyper-aware of every movement, every whispered conversation between Ethan and Ava. In the early afternoon, Sarah heard a flurry of activity upstairs. Doors opening and closing, muffled voices, the sound of bags being zipped. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. This was it. They were preparing to leave for their event. Sarah positioned herself casually in the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a book. She heard Ethan and Ava descending the stairs, their voices hushed but excited. "Hey, Sarah," Ava called out, her tone carefully neutral. "We're heading out for a bit. We'll be back later, okay?" Sarah looked up, meeting their eyes. She saw a mix of emotions there: excitement, nervousness, and something else. Was it guilt? Or perhaps just the weight of their secret? "All right," Sarah replied, keeping her voice light. "Anything special planned?" There was a beat of silence. Sarah held her breath, hoping against hope that this would be the moment they opened up to her. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Just hanging out with friends," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Sarah felt a pang of disappointment, but she pushed it aside. "Okay, have fun," she said with a smile. "Be safe, and let me know if you need anything." As the front door closed behind them, Sarah let out a long breath. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that they would invite her along at the last minute. But she reminded herself that trust takes time to build. Her job now was to be patient and supportive. Left alone in the quiet house, Sarah found herself drawn to Ethan and Ava's rooms. She stood in the doorways, taking in the subtle changes she had missed in her earlier state of suspicion. Ava's art supplies were more organized than usual, with several sketchbooks prominently displayed. Ethan's desk, typically a mess of schoolwork, now held a neat stack of flyers and what looked like a planning notebook. Sarah smiled to herself, feeling a swell of pride. Her stepchildren were growing up, taking on responsibilities and passions of their own. And while it hurt a little to be left out, she knew this was an important part of their journey. Returning downstairs, Sarah noticed a smudge of paint on the banister that she had missed earlier. It was the same shade of blue she had seen in the mural outside the event space. Without thinking, she reached out and touched it, feeling a connection to Ava's secret project. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself filled with a strange mix of emotions. There was pride in Ethan and Ava's accomplishments, excitement for whatever was unfolding at the event, and a touch of melancholy at not being part of it. But overriding all of these was a sense of hope. Hope for the future of their family, hope for the bridges they would build together. Sarah settled into her favorite armchair, a cup of tea in hand, and allowed herself to daydream about the day when Ethan and Ava would feel ready to share their passions with her. And when that day came, she promised herself she would be ready to listen, to support, and to celebrate every step of their journey. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, Sarah found herself smiling. Whatever the evening held, whatever secrets were yet to be revealed, she knew that love and understanding would light the way forward for their family. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, Sarah found herself growing increasingly restless. The house felt unusually quiet without Ethan and Ava's presence. She had just settled on the couch with a book when she heard the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming outside. Her heart raced as she heard multiple voices and footsteps approaching the front door. Before she could process what was happening, the door burst open and a chorus of voices shouted, "Surprise!" Sarah jumped to her feet, her book tumbling to the floor. The entryway was suddenly filled with familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and at the center of it all, beaming with pride, stood Ethan and Ava. What's going on?" Sarah stammered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ava stepped forward, her eyes shining. "It's for you, Sarah. We've been planning this for weeks." "For me?" Sarah repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, a rare, wide smile on his face. "Yeah, it's a thank you party for everything you've done for us." The room blurred as tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. All the suspicion, all the worry of the past weeks melted away in an instant, replaced by a wave of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. As the group ushered her into the living room, Sarah saw that it had been transformed. Streamers and balloons adorned the walls, and a banner hung across the fireplace reading, "Thank you, Sarah." Friends and neighbors surrounded her, each with a story to share about how Sarah had touched their lives. Mrs. Johnson from next door spoke about how Sarah had helped her during her husband's illness. Ethan's basketball coach praised her dedication to the team's booster club. Even Sarah's old college roommate had flown in for the occasion, recounting stories of their shared past that had the room erupting in laughter. Throughout it all, Sarah couldn't take her eyes off Ethan and Ava. They moved through the party with confidence, ensuring everyone had drinks and snacks, coordinating the flow of events. It was a side of them she had never seen before, and it filled her with an indescribable sense of pride. As the evening wore on, the party moved to the backyard, where tables had been set up under strings of twinkling lights. Sarah found herself seated at the head of the main table, surrounded by her closest friends and family. Ava clinked her glass, calling for attention. "We have one more surprise," she announced, her voice wavering slightly with emotion. She nodded to Ethan, who wheeled out a large covered easel. With a flourish, Ava pulled off the cover, revealing a stunning painting. It was a family portrait, but not a traditional one. In vibrant, abstract strokes, Ava had captured the essence of their blended family: Sarah, Ethan, Ava, and even a subtle nod to their late father. It was a visual representation of their journey, filled with bright colors and intertwining shapes that spoke of connection and growth. "Ava, it's beautiful," Sarah breathed, unable to take her eyes off the canvas. Ethan stepped forward, uncharacteristically emotional. "We wanted to show you that we see you as part of our family, not just Dad's wife, but our mom too." The word "mom" hung in the air, filled with meaning. Sarah felt her heart might burst with joy. She opened her arms, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan and Ava rushed into her embrace without hesitation. As they hugged, Sarah could hear the click of cameras and the appreciative murmurs of their guests. But in that moment, the world narrowed to just the three of them, a family, whole and healing. When they finally pulled apart, all three wiping away tears, Sarah looked around at the gathering. She saw the community that had come together to celebrate with them, the friends and neighbors who had become an extended family. She thought about the secret project, the community event that Ethan and Ava had organized, realizing now that it had all been leading to this moment. As the party continued around them, filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of shared joy, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been challenging, filled with misunderstandings and doubts, but it had led them here, to a place of love, trust, and mutual understanding. Sarah raised her glass in a quiet toast to herself, to Ethan and Ava, and to the beautiful, complicated, wonderful family they were building together. The road ahead might not always be smooth, but she knew now, without a doubt, that they would face it together. As the party wound down and the last of the guests departed, Sarah found herself sitting on the porch swing with Ethan and Ava on either side of her. The night air was cool and crisp, filled with the lingering scent of barbecue and the soft chirping of crickets. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the evening's events. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath and turned to face her stepchildren. "I can't begin to tell you how much this means to me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I think we need to talk about the past few weeks." Ethan and Ava exchanged glances, a flicker of uncertainty passing between them. "We know we worried you," Ava began hesitantly. "We saw how you were watching us, and we felt terrible about keeping secrets." Ethan nodded, his usual bravado absent. "We wanted to tell you so many times, but we were afraid it would ruin the surprise." Sarah smiled softly, reaching out to take their hands. "I understand that now, but I want you to know that I jumped to some pretty awful conclusions. I was so worried that you were in trouble or pulling away from me that I almost lost sight of who you really are." "What did you think we were doing?" Ethan asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Sarah chuckled ruefully. "Oh, you name it. Drugs, secret parties, running away. My imagination ran wild." Ava's eyes widened. "You thought we were doing drugs, Sarah? We would never." "I know that now," Sarah reassured her. "But it made me realize how little I really knew about your lives, your interests. I want that to change." There was a moment of silence as they all absorbed the weight of her words. "We want that too," Ethan said quietly. "We've been wanting to include you more, but it's been hard. After Dad died, we were so angry and hurt. It felt like letting you in would be betraying him somehow." Ava nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "But then we saw how hard you were trying, how much you cared. We realized that loving you doesn't mean we love Dad any less." Sarah felt her own eyes well up. "Oh, sweethearts," she murmured, pulling them both into a hug. "Your dad will always be a part of our family. I'm not here to replace him, just to add more love to your lives." As they pulled apart, Sarah could see a new openness in Ethan and Ava's expressions. The walls that had stood between them for so long were finally beginning to crumble. "So," Sarah said, wiping away a tear, "tell me about this community event you organized. I want to hear everything." And so, as the night deepened around them, Ethan and Ava began to share. They told Sarah about their initial idea to help local charities, how it had grown into a full-fledged community gathering. They spoke of the challenges they'd faced, the friendships they'd formed, and the sense of purpose they'd discovered. Sarah listened intently, asking questions and offering praise. She marveled at their initiative, their compassion, and their ability to bring people together. With each story, each shared laugh, she felt the bonds between them strengthening. As the conversation flowed, they began to talk about the future. Ethan shyly mentioned his growing interest in community organizing, while Ava expressed her desire to use her art to raise awareness for social causes. Sarah's heart swelled with pride and excitement. "I want you both to know," she said earnestly, "that I'm here to support you in whatever you choose to do. Your passions, your dreams, they matter to me, and I promise to always listen, to trust you, and to believe in you." The look of gratitude and love that passed over Ethan and Ava's faces was worth more than any words could express. As they sat there, under the starry sky, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. They had weathered a storm of misunderstanding and come out stronger on the other side. She knew there would be more challenges ahead. Blending a family was never easy, and they were all still healing from the loss of Ethan and Ava's father. But in that moment, Sarah was filled with hope. They had laid a foundation of trust and open communication, and she was confident they could face whatever the future held, together. As the night grew late and they finally moved to head inside, Sarah paused at the doorway, looking back at the porch swing. It seemed to symbolize their journey, the ups and downs, the back and forth, but always moving forward. With a smile, she turned off the porch light and stepped into their home, ready to embrace whatever new adventures awaited their newly strengthened family. A month had passed since the surprise party, and the atmosphere in the house had transformed. The air of secrecy and tension had been replaced by a warmth and openness that Sarah cherished. She, Ethan, and Ava had settled into a new rhythm, one filled with shared meals, open conversations, and genuine laughter. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah was tidying up Ethan's room, with his permission, a new development in their relationship, she came across a small, folded piece of paper tucked away in the corner of his desk drawer. Her hand hesitated over it, old habits of suspicion briefly resurfacing. But trust had become their new foundation, and she respected Ethan's privacy. She continued her cleaning, pushing the curiosity to the back of her mind. Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Sarah noticed Ethan seemed distracted, pushing his food around his plate rather than eating. "Everything okay, Ethan?" she asked gently. Ethan looked up, surprise flashing across his face before it settled into a look of resolve. "Actually," he began, his voice slightly shaky, "there's something I need to talk to you both about." Sarah and Ava exchanged glances, concern evident in their expressions. Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, and about our family." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I found out that there's a summer program in Dad's hometown. It's a community outreach thing, working with kids. I think I want to apply." The words hung in the air for a moment. Sarah felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Pride in Ethan's initiative, excitement for his passion, but also a twinge of sadness at the thought of him being away for the summer. "That sounds wonderful, Ethan," Sarah said warmly. "Tell us more about it." As Ethan began to explain the details of the program, Sarah could see the excitement building in his eyes. He spoke about the opportunity to mentor younger kids, to organize community events, and to connect with his father's roots. "The thing is," Ethan continued, his voice growing softer, "if I get in, I'd be living there for 2 months, with Dad's old friend, Mr. Johnson. I'd be pretty far away." Sarah reached out, placing her hand over Ethan's. "Distance doesn't change how much we love you, Ethan. If this is something you really want to do, we'll support you every step of the way." Ava nodded vigorously. "Yeah, and think of all the cool stories you'll have when you get back." Ethan's shoulders relaxed, relief evident on his face. "So, you're okay with this?" "More than okay," Sarah assured him. "We're proud of you for wanting to make a difference." As they continued to discuss the details of the program, a plan began to form. Sarah suggested they take a family trip to visit Ethan midway through the summer, turning it into an opportunity for all of them to connect with their family history. The conversation flowed late into the night, filled with excitement, a few tears, and plenty of laughter. As they finally began to clear the table, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. The open communication they had worked so hard to build had allowed Ethan to share his dreams without fear. Later, as Sarah was getting ready for bed, a knock came at her door. It was Ava, holding a sketchbook. "Sarah?" she said tentatively. "I have an idea I want to run by you." Sarah smiled, patting the bed beside her. "I'm all ears, sweetheart." Ava sat down, flipping open her sketchbook to reveal a series of vibrant drawings. "I was thinking, while Ethan's away, maybe we could work on redecorating the house. I have some ideas for murals, and I thought maybe we could do it together." Sarah felt her heart swell with joy. Here was Ava, not only sharing her passion, but wanting to include Sarah in it. "I'd love that," she said, pulling Ava into a hug. As they began to flip through the sketches together, Sarah marveled at how far they had come. From secrets and suspicion to open dreams and shared projects, their family had transformed. The summer ahead would bring changes and challenges, but Sarah felt ready to face them. They had built a foundation of trust, communication, and love that could weather any storm. As she listened to Ava excitedly describe her vision for their home, Sarah silently thanked the twists of fate that had brought them all together. Their family story was still being written, each day bringing new chapters filled with growth, love, and the occasional surprise. But now, instead of fearing the unknown, Sarah looked forward to each new page with hope and excitement. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, as a family united by choice and strengthened by love.